One of the things that the deep state has to do is demonize people with common sense who see through their schemes and their lies. In this episode, we're going to look at one entity in particular that serves as the attack poodle for the deep state in terms of demonizing everybody who opposes the agenda. Stay tuned and I'll tell you more. So if you've been paying any attention at all, especially over the last few years, you've probably noticed that the media calls anybody with a brain some sort of nasty pejorative term. They are right-wing extremists, they're far right, they're ultra conservative, they're conspiracy theorists. And now, after the mostly peaceful protests on January 6th, that very clearly at this point have the fingerprints of the FBI and the FBI's operatives all over them. Now they're saying that people are insurrectionists and seditionists if they don't agree. Well, for many years, there has been a critical attack dog for the deep state, and there are several of these, but I want to focus on one in particular. You probably know some of the names. The Anti-Defamation League is, of course, one of the big ones. They love to defame everybody who opposes their radical agenda. And they do it regularly. But I want to focus today on the Soviet Poverty Law Center, more commonly known as the Southern Poverty Law Center. They have faded a little bit from public view because some of their top executives had to resign or were fired because they were racist and sexist and they were sexually harassing people and calling people names. So the organization has suffered a big blow, but they're still very much here. And you still read constantly in the fake media anytime a good organization is mentioned, including some of the biggest and strongest Christian organizations and conservative organizations in America, that they are hate group, according to the Soviet Poverty Law Center. Literally, some of the biggest and most prestigious organizations in America, the Family Research Council, the American Family Association, the Alliance Defending Freedom, okay, the largest Christian association of attorneys in America. They're all demonized as so-called hate groups by this fringe little organization. So I want to give you some of the background. I want to give you some idea of some of the madness that they have spewed, and I also want to show you what really is going on behind the scenes here. So I think you'll enjoy this. Now, one of the things that really comes out obviously with this organization is that they're just absolute liars. Let me give you some examples. Did you know that a practicing Muslim and a peaceful Muslim who is concerned about terrorism and extremism in the Islamic community was actually one of the top anti-Muslim extremists? Yeah, if you're like a sane person and you're confused about how a Muslim could be one of the top anti-Muslim extremists, join the club. Okay. How about the idea that a prominent black law professor who came from poverty and became a leading opinion molder in the United States is somehow promoting white supremacy and is serving as an apologist for white supremacists? True story. How about another one? Actually, a friend of mine was demonized by these lunatics. They called her the matriarch of a vast anti-Indian movement. Oh, it sounds so scary. Anti-Indian movement. Well, fun fact, that matriarch of the anti-Indian movement just so happens to be a Cherokee Indian married to a direct descendant of Sacagawea, one of the most prominent Indians in American history. Now, you wouldn't know that from reading the SPLC's garbage propaganda, but they want you to be scared and they want the donations to roll in and they want you to be deceived. And more importantly, they want to provide talking points for the fake media so that anytime somebody raises a legitimate point, the fake media can dismiss it by saying, well, the SPLC says they're a hate group, right? According to the Soviet Poverty Law Center, more than half of white Americans have anti-black attitudes. Yeah, you read that right. Most Americans who have European ancestors are actually racists, okay? Did you know that many American women, including feminists, are actually advocates of a hateful ideology advocating for the subjugation of women? Yep. True story. And according to the DOD, using propaganda from the Soviet Poverty Law Center, we have a slide on religious extremists. And you see that on the screen right now. They've got the obvious suspects there: Hamas, Al Qaeda, Ku Klux Klan, things like that. And then you see evangelical Christians and Catholics and Orthodox Jews. Okay, this is the level of absurdity of the Soviet poverty law center. Now, occasionally they get caught and they get sued, and they have to apologize. Like the Muslim that they defamed by calling him an anti-Muslim extremist, they ended up having to pay him millions of dollars and make a public apology. But it gives you a hint of how fringe and extreme this organization is. And there's also more. They actually praised one of the most notorious terrorists in American history, and they have been cited by a convicted terrorist as the inspiration for his terrorist attack. So they have massive amounts of money. Their endowment has something like $500 million, guys. So it's a very lucrative business to be an attack poodle for the deep state and demonize everybody who opposes the deep state's agenda. So the SPLC, they basically terrorize people with these silly hate maps and all the rest of it, and tell them that, oh, there's hate groups hiding under every bed, and your old lady, the granny warriors, they're a hate group, okay? And then they rake in these big, huge donations. And it's all well and good, except during the Trump administration, Attorney General Jeff Sessions formally severed all ties with this group of maniacs. But now that we have the Biden administration back in power, we suspect that the relationship between the feds and the increasingly weaponized law enforcement agencies, intelligence agencies, and even the military will once again start to rely on this discredited hate group called the SPLC. It's a very, very dangerous operation. They actually have been working with some of the largest social media companies that we've already done a lot of episodes on them. They're really just tentacles of the deep state, the YouTubes of the world, the Amazons of the world, to censor people that the SPLC says we must hate. So very, very wicked organization and a very powerful organization. This anti-Muslim thing, they actually published the Field Guide to Anti-Muslim Extremists, and they had the worst anti-Muslim extremists. And one of those that they listed was Majid Nawaz. I'm sorry, it's hard to pronounce that name. So he was a jihadist at one time, and then he became a moderate Muslim and a politician, and now he works to counter violent Islamic extremism and violent Islamic narratives propagated by terrorist groups like ISIS and Al Qaeda and so on. So the SPLC called him one of the top anti-Muslim extremists. Now, in a sane world, everybody would laugh at that because it's insane, but unfortunately, the fake media, they're in the habit of parroting this mindless propaganda from the SPLC. Here is what Nawaz said about the SPLC. A bunch of first world, comfortable liberal Americans who are not Muslims have decided from their comfortable perch to label me, an activist who is working within his Muslim community to push back against extremism, an anti-Muslim extremist. Okay? Incredible. He says, I learned Arabic in order to read my holy book. In an Intelligence Squared debate, I defended the proposition that Islam was a religion of peace. This is the same week that the man who attempted to bomb Times Square was sentenced. So it wasn't the friendliest New York audience. Hosted Morgan Freeman in a mosque for his documentary, The Story of God, and on and on. But, of course, the SPLC put a target right on this man's head by calling him one of the worst anti-Muslim extremists, okay? And when the Muslims get a target put on their head by these types of extremists, very often they end up murdered, assassinated, targeted by fellow Muslims. It's really, really quite intense. Now, this is what the SPLC does. They have a habit of stirring up hatred against people. One of the people they've tried to stir up hatred against is actually a friend of mine. Her name is Elaine Willman, wonderful lady, Cherokee. She actually was registered Cherokee. She finally disassociated herself with the tribe because she didn't want to have anything to do with that, and she's a proud American citizen. But she is an Indian by heritage and by former relationship to the tribe. She also is married to, like I mentioned, a direct descendant of Sacagawea, and yet in their pseudo-intelligence report, this silly document that the SPLC puts out, they had a piece called Seeing Red, and it really is absolute racist trash. They talk about American Indians as being weak. They talk about the alleged violent hostility that is our original hatred. But now they talk about this so-called organized anti-Indian movement, and their tactic, according to the fringe lunatics at the SPLC, is to promote equality. Oh my good, that sure sounds like hate to me. How dare they promote equality? Now, if you think I'm kidding, you need to see these documents yourself. So they describe Elaine Willman, my friend, as the silver-haired matriarch of the anti-Indian movement. She was former chair of the Citizens for Equal Rights Alliance. They describe that as arguably the most important anti-Indian group in the nation, and it really is a sight to behold. Now, in this 1,500-word garbage so-called intelligence report about this alleged anti-Indian movement, they never mention the fact that this alleged leader of this alleged anti-Indian movement is actually a Cherokee Indian married to an Indian who loves Indians and has lived on numerous reservations all across the country and has actually been fighting on behalf of Indians, right? When the government comes in and breaks up their families, when these tribal kingpins abuse the members of the tribe. She has been a leading advocate for Indians against abuses by tribal governments and by the federal government, and yet somehow she is painted as an anti-Indian. Can you imagine that? This is the level of credibility that the Soviet Poverty Law Center actually has. Another person they try to stir up hate against is Dr. Carol Swain. She was a professor of political science and law at Vanderbilt University, very well known as an expert on racism and white nationalism. She just recently had an event organized by the U.S. Parents Involved in Education and the John Birch Society in South Carolina. Wonderful lady. She was appointed to the Tennessee Advisory Committee of the U.S. Civil Rights Commission. Actually, Donald Trump made her the chair of his 1776 commission. Very well-respected lady, and yet in this silly screed by the SPLC, they say Carol Swain is an apologist for white supremacists. Okay, that's from the SPLC bigwig Mark Potok. And he actually, interestingly enough, has contributed articles to the Communist Party USA's magazine, mouthpiece, People's World. Okay, her sin in the eyes of the lunatics at the SPLC was to suggest that we ought to have our immigration laws enforced. And so that is how she earned the designation as a target of the SPLC. She says, being targeted by the SPLC has had a long-lasting impact on my life and career. She wrote that in the Wall Street Journal. Offers from other universities were ended. Speaking opportunities were declined. She says, once you've been smeared in this way, mainstream news outlets are less likely to cite you as an expert. And yet, she says, today I wear the SPLC's mud as a badge of honor because I know I'm in the company of many good men and women who have been similarly vilified for standing for righteousness and truth. Now, if you read the SPLC's garbage, you'll see that anybody can find themselves on the wrong side of this. In fact, again, this Mark Potok character said that more than half of American whites are actually racist against black Americans. Now, if you believe that, you probably live under a rock and you probably don't know very many people. Okay. Now, they do this all the time. They smear everybody. They have black pastors that they don't like. If you stand for marriage, they will smear you. They actually listed Dr. Ben Carson, one of the most prominent black heroic Americans. He was, of course, a neurosurgeon. He was in the cabinet of the Trump administration. They put him on their extremist watch list because, oh my goodness, imagine this, he stood for traditional marriage. And what they do, with their tactic, they put him right next to, for example, former Ku Klux Klan Grand Wizard David Duke. And so then people look at this and they say, huh, Dr. Ben Carson is like the head of the KKK. Right? Anybody with a brain can see how ludicrous this is, but this is what they do to people. They have also attacked the John Birch Society, a patriotic organization with chapters in all 50 states that is an affiliate of the New American Magazine, publishes the New American Magazine. They don't call the JBS a hate group because, I mean, that would be kind of silly, but they do call it a patriot group, and they define patriot group as anti-government. Well, anybody who knows the JBS knows that that is extremely silly. In fact, one of the major ideologies that the JBS has stood against from the very beginning is anarchy. They view anarchy as a far-right thing, and so the JBS has always stood against anarchy and has always argued that we need government to maintain law and order, to protect our God-given rights, just like our founders believed. The purpose of government is to protect the rights that God gave individuals. And somehow, in the crazy world of the SPLC, that makes a person or a group an anti-government extremist. Unbelievable what these people have done. They have smeared many of America's leading conservative heroes. Phyllis Schlafly, one of the most important female conservative leaders in all of American history. They claim to be all feminists, and yet, nope, Phyllis Schlafly is bad because she doesn't like feminism, right? She went on to oppose gay rights and promote anti-government conspiracy theories. This is the smear machine that is the Soviet Poverty Law Center. They've attacked, I mentioned earlier, the American Family Association with millions of members is a hate group for standing for marriage. The Family Research Council, one of the biggest mainstream family groups in America, is a hate group for supporting marriage. And it's interesting, all this demonization that they have done of organizations really has an effect. You guys might remember when that terrorist busted into the Family Research Council's headquarters in D.C. With a firearm and Chick-fil-A sandwiches. His intent was to slaughter employees of the Family Research Council, and then he was going to stuff Chick-fil-A sandwiches in their mouths and rub it in their faces. Fortunately, the guy was an incompetent idiot, and so the security guard was able to tackle him and disarm him before he could slaughter the workers there. But this gives you a sense. And when this guy was being interviewed by the FBI about his terrorist attack, he admitted that I was inspired to do this terror attack by the Soviet Poverty Law Center. In fact, he admitted that he used their hate map to find the Family Research Council. And so this is the kind of the consequence of this demonization. But it's even worse when the government starts picking up this madness and starts teaching it to our police agencies, our law enforcement, our intelligence agencies, and even our military. Other groups that have found themselves on the hate group list. The Granny Warriors, founded by a patriotic 74-year-old grandmother, landed on the SPLC's hate list as well. And to give you a sense of how radical these people are, one of their heroes, and they actually posted all this all over their website, is Bill Ayers, the founder of the Weather Underground, the communist terrorist group that bombed the Capitol. The communist terrorist group that bombed the State Department, that bombed the Pentagon. And so the SPLC says, oh my goodness, conservative Americans are insurrectionists and they attacked the Capitol. No, actually, the terrorist that you guys praise on your website as this wonderful, wonderful protest leader, activist leader, is the one who actually bombed the Capitol, incidentally, with money and instructions from the mass murdering dictatorship enslaving Cuba. They also had a habit of murdering police officers, then they would try to bomb the funerals of the police officers so they could kill more police officers. These are the kinds of people that the SPLC thinks you should like. They also have this operation where they're targeting children. They've got their sick propaganda in the schools. They used to call it teaching tolerance, then it got a bad smell, so now they call it learning for justice or some such nonsense. One of the things they do is promote transgenderism to little children. They've got a book called 10,000 Dresses where you can learn, where your children can learn all about how you might have been born in the wrong body, but if you feel like you were born in the wrong body, hey, you can be born in a better body. And I want to go back to Bill Ayers for just one moment, because the SPLC claims to be oh so concerned about extremism and terrorism. Well, the FBI agent operative, Larry Grathwell, who infiltrated the leadership of Bill Ayers' terrorist group, again, Bill Ayers, the hero of SPLC, he actually said something very interesting. I want to show you this clip, the interview he did, where he talks about what the leadership of the Weather Underground was planning. And mind you, these are birds of a feather with the SPLC. Listen to this.
I brought up the subject of what's going to happen after we take over the government. We become responsible then for administrating, 250 million people. And there was no answers. No one had given any thought to economics. How are you going to clothe and feed these people? The only thing that I could get was that they expected that the Cubans and the North Vietnamese and the Chinese and the Russians would all want to occupy different portions of the United States. They also believed that their immediate responsibility would be to protect against what they called the counter-revolution. And they felt that this counter-revolution could best be guarded against by creating and establishing re-education centers in the Southwest, where we would take all the people who needed to be re-educated into the new way of thinking and teach them how things were going to be. I ask, well, what is going to happen to those people that we can't re-educate, that are die-hard capitalists? And the reply was that they'd have to be eliminated. And when I pursued this further, they estimated that they would have to eliminate 25 million people in these re-education centers. And when I say eliminate, I mean kill. 25 million people. I want you to imagine sitting in a room with 25 people, most of which have graduate degrees from Columbia and other well-known educational centers, and hear them figuring out the logistics for the elimination of 25 million people. And they were dead serious.
There you go, folks. So they wanted to build concentration camps in America to brainwash American counter-revolutionaries and then exterminate something like 10% of America's population in these death camps, and they were allied with mass murdering foreign dictatorships. I mean, talk about extremism. Talk about a national security threat. This is extremism, guys. This is terrorism. And yet the SPLC described him as, throughout his career as a civil rights organizer, a radical anti-Vietnam War activist and teacher and author, Ayers has developed a rich vision of teaching that interweaves passion, responsibility, and self-reflection. Okay, that is what the SPLC says about this domestic terrorist on its website. He actually was interviewed by the New York Slimes. They asked him what was his regret. He regretted that he hadn't bombed more stuff. Okay, so they're not worried about violence. They're not worried about domestic extremism. They themselves are the hateful domestic extremists. They went on to describe Ayers has taught in public schools and spearheaded alternative education projects. As a professor of education at the University of Illinois at Chicago, he helps aspiring teachers recognize and tap the potential of every child. Ay, guys. For Ayers, challenging stereotypes and reforming inner-city schools is as much about fighting for social justice as about improving the quality of teaching and learning. Can you imagine if a conservative or a Christian had led a terrorist group that, with the help of a hostile foreign government, had bombed our Capitol, bombed our State Department, bombed our Pentagon, and killed police? Can you imagine what the SPLC might have to say about them? Of course, there's no such example because that's not what conservative and Christian Americans do. But this is crazy, guys. This is absolutely crazy. And I think now you have a real sense of what this hate group is. And this is just one of these groups, guys. This is what they do. They go to their lying friends in the fake media, and then they parrot these nasty accusations, and they demonize good people. Even liberals have rejected this group, right? The civil rights attorney and Southern Center for Human Rights president Stephen Bright pointed out that SPLC founder Morris Dees is, and I'm quoting here, a con man and a fraud. He said he takes advantage of naive, well-meaning people. One of the things that Bright did not mention is that in court documents, the founder of this disgusting group, Morris Dees, was accused of beating his wife and sexually molesting his minor stepdaughter, among other insane behavior. So, guys, if you work in a police department, if you work in a sheriff's department, if you work in a federal law enforcement agency, pass this video around. Don't let the lying SPLC influence your people. These extremists, these haters, these con men are not the kind of people that our tax-funded agencies should be listening to. Folks, we've got to expose these people. We've got to stand for the truth. The SPLC is a dishonest, dangerous hate group, and they must be exposed. And by the way, folks, it's just one tentacle of the deep state. We'll be back next week with much more. My name is Alex Newman. Thank you for watching Behind the Deep State, and until next time, God bless you. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to subscribe, hit like, hit that little bell so that you'll be notified whenever we post new videos. And also, please make sure to share this video with your friends. Email's a great way to do it. Remember, there are powerful forces working to steal our freedom and destroy our country. We need to work together, expose those behind the deep state. Otherwise, you can kiss your liberties goodbye.